This is Jeff Herman, and welcome to Survive, Adapt, Transform. It's a weekly series on operating in this new environment. And this series, we're thrilled to be joined today by the team at First National Bank. We have George Holt, Director of International Banking Services from First National Bank. Chris Colella, he's SVP of Commercial Banking, Team Leader at First National Bank. And Musa Cassis, Director of Ohio SBDC Export Assistance Network. So we thank you all for joining us today. And we want to thank First National Bank for being our sponsor for this series, Survive, Adapt, Transform. This is week 4 in the series in which we've delved into a lot of topics around legal, insurance, investments, and health and wellness, and making sure that we can all thrive and operate in this new environment. And the topic today is how to do business in the new world, and specifically it's the impact of coronavirus on global supply chains and logistics. And so we are going to be diving deep into this topic. We appreciate everyone's time today. Just from a housekeeping standpoint, if you do have any questions, please feel to log them in the Q&A box on Zoom or in the chat feature. And I'm also monitoring the connection over here on Facebook Live. And so if you feel free to say hello to us and where you're watching us from on Facebook Live, we appreciate that as well. So with that, I will kick off the conversation as far as doing business in the new world, the impact of coronavirus on global supply chains and logistics. And once again, welcoming George, Chris, and Musa to the conversation. To get things started, Musa, if you could please provide an overview of the current state of the global supply chain. What have you seen the impact of the coronavirus has been on the global supply chain?
Thank you very much for this opportunity, Jeff, and welcome. Good morning, everybody. I would say disrupted for sure. That is the beginning, and this disruption actually it started before the coronavirus hit. It started about in the last 3 months of 2019 due to the tariff. And if we follow up with U.S. port news and longshoremen and do the count for number of containers coming from East, we have seen a drop of 18%, 20%, 19% in 3 months consecutively in the last 3 months of 2019. Now, move into the coronavirus, and it did add to this situation tremendously. So because of that, we have experienced, first, it is more expensive. So per kilogram, there is increase from $2.1 per kilogram. Now it's close to $5 per kilogram. Then number of vessels going across, they not enough. So therefore, this is a disruption. Increase in airplane costs, because usually they use passenger planes at the belly of them, in the bottom of the belly of them, which carries a lot of, commercial trade. That also increased. So now it's 777 coming from the East. Sometimes it costs at $1 million carrying 100 tons of products. And most importantly with that is lots of uncertainty. Receiving the products on time. This is also increasing. Why? Because there is competition. And if there's a vessel that you're expecting your product in 2 weeks and somebody else come and bid on that vessel for their products, they will give them the priority and then your product will be pushed back. So because of the competition. But the most important also that we experienced on top of all of that, it's the trade protectionism, on the increase. So there is on the PPE, which is protection, person protection gear, also on food. So there are about more than 23 countries that impose trade restriction on their products, including United States, for shipping overseas and so on. So these are the current situation that, the trade and the supply chain have experiencing in the last few months.
And so that was bad enough in Q4 with the erratic nature, and shifting into the coronavirus, were we at a global standstill? Did the supply chain effectively freeze? George, do you have a perspective on that?
So effectively, the supply chain was heavily disrupted, obviously. So it was an overall shift in attitude and the nature that and the thought that the supply chain was completely resilient, was absolutely resilient, and could not be tested. So we found that that is not indeed the case. So what COVID, well, initially, as Musa pointed out, was the trade negotiations, and then pile on with the COVID-19 has caused many companies and many consumers to rethink the supply chain. It's caused a great deal of disruption by causing the consumers to really to stop consuming completely. Many goods and services have decreased because of fear of infection. Obviously, the increase in the global unemployment rate has impacted consumption, and we've also created a really significant dependence on e-commerce now. So that has heightened the need for a continuous supply chain, which has only created more stress on the supply chain. So frozen, obviously, I would say is a strong word. It is backlogged, I guess would be more appropriate. But certainly the strains from having what I consider to be a perfect storm of trade negotiations and global pandemic have really hindered goods and services moving freely across borders.
Yeah, and this is a sidebar, but I know the impact on the warehousing space because of the supply chain disruptions. And yes, it was not frozen, but it was certainly backlogged. But there was a need where I know that warehousing is in demand now, and that's a separate issue completely. That you just have to put things that were in.
Well, exactly. So, I was certainly planning on discussing later. We can certainly go down this road, but one avenue that many of consumers and businesses have armed themselves with is increasing inventory to combat the disruption in the supply chain. So, which obviously goes hand in hand with the increased amount of warehouse space being utilized. So it all does, certainly work together.
Right. Well, so we're emerging we're in this reopening phase of the economy. The global supply chain is, I would say, getting back on track. But it's still the fact remains, we have erratic tariff schedules, right? The tariff schedules are erratic. They're constantly changing. There have been trade negotiations with China, but the schedules that are used by the Customs and Border Protection and the bonds required, that's just still erratic. Do you see any let up in that?
Actually, as of 2 days ago, there a possibility, even after today is the first day effective for USMCA, that there possibility of 10% increase on aluminum tariff on Canada. And that's what the administration probably is hinting to. So this is still continuous, still with us, is still creating a lot of uncertainties, not only with China, unfortunately, but with all other countries that we still have trade with. And the tariff, and purposely the tariff was actually initiated in order to lessen the trade deficit, but the trade deficit of the United States, it's with over 150 countries we have trade deficit with, believe it or not. So if we're shifting from China, we're going into other countries like Vietnam, which is increased in more than $35 billion in deficit with Vietnam. So actually it's not achieving what is supposed to be, which is creating that balance in trade. So it's still a lot of uncertainty in that regard. And there is, and with the World Trade Organization now, that's settling such things like that is crippled because the United States actually did not appoint the 3 judges in the panel of 5. So actually they can't make any decisions. So it's still going to be in shambles, not only the supply chain, but also the tariff situation. So I agree with you there on that.
So I'll add that, the geopolitical landscape has taken center stage. So it's not only just the U.S. Trade negotiations, but they're global trade negotiations. Brexit is still very much an uncertain piece right now. So what is the EU going to do? Followed by there is a pending negotiation with between the U.S. and the EU over trade as well. So it's a very complex and intertwined discussions that will need to be occurring here in the near future on trade and providing ways for us to, again, freely move goods and services on top of an already complex situation with the pandemic and COVID-19 shutting down borders effectively. So there's plenty of uncertainty that will continue to remain around how tariffs, not only tariffs, but trade negotiations and the pandemic will affect the supply chain and the disruption and basically the lags and the delays that it has caused.
So then, Chris, we've had uncertainty is the name of the game these days, right? And volatility is the name of the game. Right. And we had a big black swan event here, a disruption, a global pandemic that hit us and, globally started, in January, but is rolling through and hit the U.S. in March and April. That's still unresolved, but the volatility remains. So what can regional manufacturers do to protect and retain global sourcing for their important product inputs? Lots of materials and lots of trade is done and products are created as a function of global sourcing. So what's your outlook for regional manufacturers here?
Well, in talking to our clients and customer base, Jeff, overall, it's been a significant challenge, obviously. But to Moose's point, I think back with respect to the tariffs that started late last year, the latter half of last year, our clientele actually did a very good job. The well-managed companies kind of managed around it to some degree. The tariffs, if tariffs were impacted significantly to the bottom line or the cost of goods for a manufacturer, they would kind of maneuver around that and try to pull those goods in from other countries where the tariffs were not as impactful. Within the region that we see here in our Cleveland region and across F&B's footprint, manufacturers last year started sourcing other vendors to meet their supply chain of the products that they were providing. So I think that provided a good foundation for them and helped them when COVID hit. But uncertainty, I guess that's the underlying word. That's probably a universal term we've heard from everyone. And with COVID, that uncertainty, was accentuated, obviously, and has created additional challenges. So from an international perspective, I guess I would defer to maybe George a little bit to comment further, but it's been a challenge. I think the latter half of 19 helped manufacturers start to resource supply chains, though it's still a significant impact. George, you want to elaborate further a little?
Sure. What it has, and again, this is across the F&B, what many of our customers this has allowed them to do, the silver lining here, again, is that they've realized that the supply chain, their current supply chain protocols were outdated. So it allowed for a hard look at how they view who their suppliers are and how they facilitate trade across borders. So just to kind of give some highlights of what some of our clients have done to help mitigate this risk. Many have created supply chain emergency plans to obviously expand their supplier network, conducted vulnerability audits, adopted risk evaluation tools, built up, again, with the warehousing, built up some critical inventory so that any disruption won't impact the significant inventory that they need, and identified And I think one of the more critical pieces, identified backup suppliers to diversify the supply base. So those are some of the steps that our clients have taken in order to mitigate any disruptions that may happen in the future.
Inventory buildup, that's an interest. And Musa, I'll let you go ahead.
You know what, I just wanted to add to these important points, because supply chain is very important. And what we did a survey for 10 counties in our region for my clients and other clients in the region. And when we checked with them, and it was actually very much similar to a survey done by Mid-America Business Index, which is a middle states, Iowa and the other around 10 states around there, that 41% of the companies will search for a new supply chain, while 20% they think very drastic changes in the supply chain, and only 16%, or rather 26% say, no, supply chain will stay the same because they probably have like a niche market with that. So they need, their supplier needs them, and they, from that point. So what that indicates that there's about like 61% of companies expecting changes and looking for new suppliers. That means one thing, that there is a gap in supply chain, and what we experience with our clients, that they looking to bridge that gap, and that's where we have these programs in order to trying to bridge that gap for them. And another thing, that about 31% that they turn into local suppliers already shifted to start buying from local suppliers. So there is a drastic change. And the reason for that, not only the tariff and not only the COVID, but now because of the COVID victims, there is about 500,000 companies in China already declare bankruptcy. And in United States, there are some companies declaring bankruptcy, and then there is a lot of consolidation. So that also have shifted the relation between buyers and sellers. And now you're gonna deal with the new rules and new regulation and new culture, even with US companies that you're gonna outsource from. So these are all issues. And now it's blown the idea of that just-in-time inventory, but now that's why you see increase in warehousing, because just-in-time inventory proved that it's, any time interruption of war or pandemic, is going to create a problem. So we are facing a big drastic, and as a group, as a network, we're trying to work with our companies, work with banks, work with other economic development in order to outreach for the resources. The state of Ohio, we have about reach with 84 countries that now we could help companies, local companies, instead of just depending on China 100%, but rather trying to find other sources for them.
So then what are these hedging strategies? Because you mentioned, so from just in time to, which means basically holding very little inventory, to having probably a significant amount of inventory being required. What hedging strategies would you recommend to avoid, assuming that there will be more disruptions? Let's just assume that, right? There's going to be more disruption.
Yeah.
So what hedging strategies would you recommend?
Have George answer it?
Sure. Well, and a lot of it goes back to what some of our clients are doing today. Again, not to be redundant, but certainly continue to diversify the supply base, identify backup suppliers. Another critical piece, which we think is helpful, is identify those critical suppliers and really have a focused strategy around being a true partner with them, meaning engage them with joint cost-cutting strategies, or ensure that their sustainability and their supply chains are up to date and accurate. So really becoming a partner with those critical suppliers abroad to ensure that that their health is good, and so therefore your health is good in the supply chain. But certainly diversification is key, and there has been a shift to more localized supplying, or even kind of a benefit of, as NAFTA, I'll call it NAFTA 2.0, has been negotiated. There has also been a shift to continue to look towards both Canada and Mexico as supply regions as well. So there is a conscious effort to be able to diversify supply, and that is a great way for hedging the future any future disruptions that may occur.
So part of hedging is financing, obviously. And Chris, from a business financing standpoint, how have you seen companies change and evolve their structure, their CapEx, intentions? What type of financing needs are required in this new world, given the resiliency required now?
Right. That's a great question, Jeff. So, obviously, as COVID impacted the world and domestically, our clients as well, small and mid-market companies, April and May, their primary focus was the PPP loans, obviously. So, from that perspective, it was how could they obtain capital to help support their liquidity, retain employee base, as well as just gain some additional working capital to get through an uncertain time of what they did not know, how long it would last, how they would be impacted from a supply chain, from a demand basis. So, the PPP loans became the priority. First National Bank, like most banks, I think from the commercial banking side, as well as, full teams within the banking system, supported that. So, FNB provided somewhere between $2.5 and $3 billion between April and May. 19,000 clients were satisfied. So, but from, first perspective, small and mid-market businesses were focused on that, working capital, which PPP provided. From that point, CapEx, to your question with related to CapEx, coming into 2020, I think most of our client base and prospects we were calling on were optimistic about what 2020 was going to bring. Though there were challenges with respect to tariffs and from a global perspective, how things were moving in different parts of the world, there was optimism that there was demand coming into 2020, and thought that demand would support another good year. 18 was probably exceptional for most of our C&I clients. 19 was good, maybe not as good, but you're comparing it to 18, which was an exceptional year. And they thought 2020 would be as good as 19. Right. So, there are CapEx projects still on the board. Some businesses are moving forward with those diligently, more cautiously, obviously. But a lot of customers in whether it be, investment real estate, which is still relatively active, I will say, C&I, industrial, healthcare, those CapEx projects have maybe been kicked down the road a little bit. There is still demand there, but maybe some delays just to see how COVID and how the world economy will respond. I will say coming into June, as we've continued to talk diligently, with George's team, our commercial banking team, and across the bank's departments, in continuing to talk significantly daily, if not weekly, with our clients, is that June started to see a movement in a positive direction. So those CapEx spends and projects may move into the third quarter or fourth quarter, but I will say it's with caution, Right. So some of the CapEx spends have been kicked down a little bit, Jeff.
So we're can't believe we're actually coming up on time here, but I feel like we've only scratched the surface. I mean, are there specific examples? Say, what is FNB to support doing business in a new world? What advice would you recommend, or do you have maybe a case study or a vignette you can provide to wrap up our conversation?
Sure. I mean, I'll defer to George a little bit to start that off from the international banking side.
Sure. So just to be brief, we continue to advise clients, again, to diversify supply chain, look at what they're doing as far as managing and mitigating the risks from their suppliers. We also are very much conscious of what the, as you spoke of, what the Fed is doing and what the Treasury is doing, the impact on the dollar, and how that will affect any type of global activity when it comes to currency management. We continue to discuss the impact of not only our central bank, but central banks globally, who also are very much in the same boat as the Fed, fighting for their economy. So our discussions are, again, just surrounding managing risk, and we have the tools to help and mitigate those risks. So to keep us informed, get us involved when doing any type of cross-border activity, and we can assist.
Right. And Musa, I know you have a webinar coming up here, so maybe provide some final thoughts and then share some details on the webinar you have coming up to truly is a deep dive on this conversation.
Sure. One of the things that I want to start that kudos to the FNB, because my clients a lot apply for the PPP, and they were very helpful and they were happy with this service. So many thanks to you helping my clients as well. The global supply chain, actually we have, it's broken, and we're going to have a webinar on a week from today at 10 o'clock. It's free for everybody. We will send the link to everybody, and this is going to be with two experts, one of, the CEO from Blue Water Growth, and attorney Yunkovic, Dennis Yunkovic, also from been 35 years in China, and they've been doing with that. So it's going to be a very helpful seminar for everybody to attend. And I agree with George, diversification of supply chain, and we have the tools at YSU International to help companies bridging that gap and find you new suppliers by dissecting what you have with your code, NAICS code, and your HTS code, and we will help them find the new suppliers worldwide.
That's great.
Okay, well, that's really good to know. Musa, you've provided a lot of data. You've brought a lot of data to the discussion as well. We greatly appreciate it. So with that, we want to respect everyone's time. But once again, we'd like to thank Chris Colella, SVP Commercial Banking Team Leader at FNB, George Holt, Director, International Banking Services at FNB, and Musa Casas, Director of the Ohio SBDC Export Assistance Network at YSU. And this has been an amazing discussion. I feel like we've just scratched the surface. So for any of our audience members out there that want more details, please feel free to drop me a note, or Musa or George or Chris. We'll provide the contact information in the description below when we publish this recording on businessjournaldaily.com. So once again, thanking everyone for joining us today, thanking FNB for the sponsorship of Survive, Adapt, Transform, and really this compelling topic, which I feel like we'll have to continue again. We have to really dig deeper into this topic on doing business in the new world. So with that, I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you all for joining us. This has been insightful and informative, and we will talk to you again soon.